Our Māori pioneers, and that was the name of them before they became the 28th Māori Battalion. Yeah, what they did for us. And even when we think about conscription that was taught to us in the 80s in the World War I and World War II, what was happening here in Aotearoa at that time? Why should we be moving off and fighting over in another country for another land when we were struggling to fight for our own land here?
This podcast is proudly supported by the Ōtara Network Action Committee, ŌNAC, community-owned, community-driven and community-led.
Welcome everyone to the We Ōtara podcast, sponsored by ŌNAC. ŌNAC, community-owned, community-driven, community-led. Now, we had an amazing guest all the way from Waimonli. If you're around those parts, hello. From Waimonli School, the Deputy Principal, Bronwyn Hetaraka, and just an amazing guest. She explained about her humble beginnings out in Kaitaia to where she is now, being an amazing deputy principal to those who, have the luck of being a part of that amazing school, and just talking about a lot of changes in terms of how we can teach our children in the near future, so we can hopefully be able to shepherd them into a better life. If you're watching this episode, I hope you absorb a lot, like I did in this episode, because I took a lot. And I believe that we can come to an agreement that change is good and we can be that vehicle of change. So, Bronwyn Hetaraka, Vincent Vitalino, We Ōtara podcast. I hope you enjoy. To start off with things, I saw your truck. It was amazing, by the way. I was next to Will's. Will's like, oh, there's another truck here. What are you going to?
Yeah, that was from me. Happy birthday, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah. Happy Matariki, everything. I worked damn hard. I deserve a truck. So, to be fair, it was also to carry 3 ton of concrete granite to the far north for my daddy's headstone. So it was real practical like that too, yeah.
Just from that brief introduction, we were talking about your, all the hard work that you had done. So what was it like for yourself, if you don't mind, in a small brief introduction about yourself? Well, how was it like growing up for yourself in terms of your childhood?
Tēnā koutou I te tuatahe, ko koutou e hakaronga mai ki tēnei irirangi. He kōtiro tēnei no te raki, no te muri whenua, he hakapapa I tērā rohe o tira tai atu ki te tai rāwhiti. He kōtiro hau ki oku mātua, he māma hau ki taku tama, he krani māma hau ki aku mokopuna. Nō reira, ko wai hau, ko Bronwyn Hetaraka tōku ingoa, he tumā ki tua rua o te kuro Waimonli, o tira I tēnei rohe o te poki o Ōtara. So who am I and where do I hail from? And also, what kind of upbringing did I have? I am a country bumpkin at heart. So I hail from the very far north, with connections to te muri whenua, our 5 iwi that come from the far north. So a lot of people think if you're from the north, you are Ngāpuhi. And ka aroha ki oku whanaunga o Ngāpuhi. Yes, they are one of the bigger tribes, but all the brave and the beautiful live in the very far north. And we have 5 iwi up there, or 6, but 5 when I was growing up. And starting at the very far north, up in Kaitaia, we've got Ngāti Kuri, Te Aupōuri, Ngai Takoto, Ngāti Kahu on the east coast, and Te Raroa on the west coast. So that's on my daddy's side. And then jumping down to the central east coast, I'm Ngāti Pro on my koka, my mummy's side, so around the Gisborne area. So like I said, happy to rock my gumboots. Is born and bred in the very far north in Kaitaia. And at that time, so a child of the 70s and the 80s, went to school up in the far north. And we had Kara Primary, Kara Intermediate, and Kara College. Unless you were unless you were Catholic, then you might might have gone to the convent in primary. Now they've got several other schools up there supporting te reo Māori with our kura kaupapa. So we came down, like many whānau, out of the rural areas looking for work. So that's not just in the 60s when I think about my mum and dad who came from, my mum from the East Coast, went down to Wellington, and my dad in the far north also went to Wellington because Auckland wasn't really the place you would go to in the 60s. You'd head down to Wellington, and that was kind of where everybody met, and you either worked in the post office or some connection like that. And so my mum and dad made twinkle of an eye at each other in a store. Well, that's the story that my dad tells, and my mum fell desperately in love with my daddy. Different story from my mum. She said he was just being a hoha coming to buy the newspaper back that time to find out when he was, or if he was playing rugby that week. And so, because obviously there was no Facebook or mobile phones, so you could text people, it was get the local paper or the Herald back then. And so she just got a bit hoha with him being a nuisance. And finally, I think he asked her out, and well, the rest was history. So from that wonderful union, 3 beautiful women, strong Māori women, were born out of that union. So yep. So with that, Mum and Dad met down in Wellington, but raised their family up in the far north in Kaitaia. But like many, as the work would drop off in our rural areas, the decision to come into Tāmaki Makaurau, into Auckland, was made. And I couldn't believe it as a young 14, 15-year-old, thinking, how dare you take us away from our world of a Raleigh 20 and the party line of a telephone and climbing trees and staying out on the streets, on the hard and mean streets of Kaitaia until the sun went down and your mum or dad was yelling at you to hurry up and come inside because it's kai time. And so blessed to have a really grounded upbringing with a mum that stayed home with us and looked after us until we were at intermediate, and a working dad. And with that, as an educator now, really valuing that and realizing, the significance of our mum being able to stay home and raise her children. At that time, I'd come home, and I remember one time riding my bike home from intermediate, and it had been pouring down with rain and having the fire on, and Mum was home, and just not realizing how huge that was to have a parent at home with us full time. And when I recall as a mum now and a grandmother now, how hard it was for me raising my own child, thinking, as a solo mum at that time, there's no way I could have done it without my parents. Without their input into my life, my 26-year-old son wouldn't be the man that he is, and I just really sort of mihi atu ki ngā klani mātua. I really sort of send my praises to our grandparents that are out there that are raising their children right now. And that's not just here in Ōtara, but actually across Aotearoa. We have so many grandparents that themselves are still working full time, but they're also raising their grandchildren as well, because for a variety of reasons, whether their children are just so busy in their own careers or busy doing other things, whatever that reason is. And sort of grandparents that are expecting to, I've done my dash, I've raised my children and I should be enjoying my grandchildren, are actually now raising their children. That's not something new though. That's, it's always been a part of our history, our grandparents, if we think from a Māori perspective, was noticed in it when children started to talk and walk. You would be noticed for the gifts that were starting to develop within you, and as such would be nurtured in those. If we think of the platform of our marae, our traditional marae, and you were kind of identified at a young age, well, are you the potato peeler, or are you at the front being the kaikaranga or kai kōrero, and all the nurturing that used to happen. And so when grandparents would say, well, take the oldest child, would be really with the thought of raising that child in the old ways, of being able to nurture them and give them that knowledge. And, certainly blessed that our dad, we were raised with, not necessarily with te reo Māori. Can I say that even though my dad and all his siblings were fluent in te reo Māori, it's a really interesting place and space to be in right now, because although I'm fluent in te reo Māori, when I look across my generation, as far as, so thank you to think that I'm only 21, but you might need to add a little bit on as I celebrate a significant birthday come December, beginning with 5 and ending with 0, but I'm in that generation where we had my parents, one parent that was fluent in te reo Māori, and one that wasn't. And so the impact of their generation being raised with, of not speaking te reo Māori, native schools, and being punished at school for speaking te reo Māori, the impact and the thought pattern of, in order to succeed in today's world, me whai atu koe I te ringa Pākehā, te ara Pākehā, meaning in order to be successful, we needed to follow the white ways. And I think when perhaps that narrative was spoken, it was a time when our language was strong, our traditions were strong, our oratory was strong, and never the thought of that we would lose our language and ultimately lose our culture and our identity. And in today's world, we see, the impact of that. We have generations coming through that don't have our language. And the fact is that is not just Māori, though. When we think here in Tāmaki Makaurau or ki te Tonga, in South Auckland, we have so many whānau that are experiencing that, and I just really, when I think about our school at Waimonley, and I just really mihi atu ki te whānau Tonga, really just acknowledge our Tongan whānau there that have the first language in their home is Tongan, and it's the everyday language, and they know that English is a second language, so sending their kids to school to learn English and numeracy and literacy and all the different curriculum areas, but the language, their identity really is so strong, and our Tongan whānau are just so rich, and that is a capital competency that we can't teach, and just so rich, so rich. I have no idea whether or not I answered your question.
Oh, you've gone beyond than answering just my question. A sun is a bright star, right? You are a bright star. You just went and popped and expanded, and I was like, okay, I don't have to do my job. I think I'm fine. Well, no, it's just full of knowledge, and I've got so many questions now that I can lay upon, with just talking to you about it. All the words that you were saying is so true. Our generation doesn't, and I talk about even my generation from the early 90s up to noughties, to 00s. They don't know how lucky they are in terms of knowing their culture, because you have beautiful people like yourself and our grandparents, our nanas and our papas who are there going, back in our days, and we go from there. But when I think about my family, so I have my friends who's trying to connect them back to where they were with their grandparents and whatnot. They don't have that luxury anymore because they're now gone. Mm. But they want to go back to and tap into their Samoa ways, but they're English speakers first. Mm. So they're having so much difficulty having that connection, and I truly believe that we should have that in our classrooms, because then what happens in a generation, and I'm always thinking about our beautiful brothers and sisters out of New Way, and I think of Tukalau, who their languages are disappearing, even in their native beautiful land. It's gone. It's almost gone, and they're all speaking English. But to maintain and memorize all those languages is a task, and I believe a classroom is a good environment for it. It's just, how do we shift that into a perspective where not only our children is learning the core values from a home perspective, a cultural perspective, as well as the basic stuff when they get into the real world, well, quote unquote real world, which is like the workforce and whatnot. And as an educator, I want to go back down to the core of things. How was it like for you to be into a different education system to where it is now? Because you mentioned a whole lot of things about that education system, but for a generation like us, we haven't got a mental picture of it. So if you may, please explain.
Yeah. I think the foundations are there, and if I just look at the Ministry of Pacific Peoples and the way that they've not only embraced our language weeks, it's certainly a beginning, it's a starting, but the reality is, outside of South Auckland, how many other communities celebrate our language weeks? You know, how many schools other than primary or maybe your ECEs celebrate? And at what level is it done at high school, you know, other than by the Samoan group or the Māori group or the Cook Island group at high school? And even then it'll be real surface, because we know that NCEA is the priority for our high school. And where is the cultural recognition and competency with that, you know? So definitely it's a great start. But, you know, we kind of drive back and we can see it happening in a lot of different organisations. And we start here in Aotearoa with the recognition of Te Tiriti o Waitangi. You know, it's got to start there with, you know, and I know, you know, come on, let's be real. We have a lot of whānau out there that don't know what Te Tiriti o Waitangi is. And I'm not just talking our Pākehā whānau or our tangata tiriti whānau, which is the word that's going around at the moment, those that are part of Te Tiriti. But we've also got Māori, because again, if we come back to the curriculum, it wasn't something that was taught. You know, it wasn't the founding document, as we were talking earlier on. You know, if you're a child of the 80s going to school, you learnt about World War I and World War II and the alliances and who was involved. But where was our learning about World War I and World War II, about how Niue, as the Rock, their investment, their human investment and resources into World War I and World War II? You know, what did that look like for our Samoan whānau, our Tongan whānau, and our Māori when we think about our Māori pioneers, and that was the name of them before they became the 28th Māori Battalion. Yeah, what they did for us. And even when we think about conscription that was taught to us in the 80s in the World War I and World War II, what was happening here in Aotearoa at that time? Why should we be moving off and fighting over in another country for another land when we were struggling to fight for our own land here, when it was getting confiscated left, right and centre? And, you know, so I love the idea that in 2023, through New Zealand curriculum, there is the introduction of Aotearoa New Zealand history. So the expectation is that in 2023, we're teaching Aotearoa histories, but the reality also is content knowledge. You know, and that's probably the biggest factor, not just in Aotearoa histories, but there's also a lacking of content knowledge in all the different curriculum areas. So as much as we have this refresh, a new curriculum that's supposed to be coming out, what does that model look like, and how are we supporting our teachers that are supposed to be doing that? You know, both our experienced teachers, our teachers that have been in for a little while, but also our new teachers that are coming in, you know, fresh and green and exciting. And how are we supporting them, and how's that aligning with universities as far as them putting out our beginning teachers? You know, what are they doing to help support them? Because, you know, I have to admit that a lot of what I learnt at university after a 3-year degree, it's not too much that I've actually really used in a practical sense in the classroom. A lot of that has happened as you went along, as you worked through either the curriculum or the relationships that you're building with whānau. There's nowhere that you learn that when you go off to university to say, actually, the biggest part of teaching is building and maintaining strong relationships with the whānau. There's nowhere that I don't recall that actually ever being in there, but that's your number one thing. And being able to notice if there's something happening with a child, if a child's coming into you and you notice, or if there is a lack of attendance, they're not coming to school, these are all indicators to us, there's a bit more happening in there, but sometimes we're so much focused on the academic box that we're supposed to put our kids into that we're missing a lot of the key things that, I suppose I could say under Maslow's theory with regards to providing the basics of shelter, of food. And I think on the back of post-COVID, it's probably more obvious now. There's not a month or a week, really, I should say, that I don't get a call from our whānau just sort of on a Friday or a Saturday night sort of saying, hey, Bron, sorry to text you. And you just can feel the just feel that maybe the hakama, the embarrassment, the shame of having to text on a Friday night, on a Saturday night, Bron, I've got no kai. How can you help me? And I'm not saying this is our Māori whānau, actually. This is, everybody, the struggle is real out there. And, we're blessed that we've got organisations like Ōtara Kai Village, Ōtara Health, South Seas that we can plug into on a Monday to Friday. But if it's a Friday night and it's 8:20 on a Friday night, or it's 9:30 on a Saturday night, which is when I get those texts, it's like, okay, hang on. And literally I've had to pull food out of my cupboards to say, okay, this is what I can give you until I can either hook up with either my own church or somebody else that's able to help. And that's not even just post-COVID. That is just the reality of people struggling and living, So, with that, the struggle is real. And it's not just here in Ōtara, it's across, yeah.
It's across the board. And again, we mentioned COVID. COVID's the key word, because from post 2019, we had our struggles, but we weren't at that level of okay, we now need to dig in deep and deeper than we need to be, because we were not only closed off from each other, we were closed off from basically the entirety of the world. And we did not know how to handle these sort of things, and we were in our own new environment. So when you mentioned, like, when you're getting a call around at 9 o'clock in the evening, it's heartbreaking, because it was normal back still after post-COVID or pre-COVID, but it's getting even worse to this point. You mentioned about our beautiful young teachers who are going into our education sectors. I was just thinking in my head, if you were a guest tutor, what advice could you give to these young teachers who are going into these sectors of education? What sort of advice would you give them in terms of trying to have that interconnection between not only just the student but the family behind them, so they can create an environment for safety and also just growth as well? Yeah.
Probably the biggest advice I give to a lot of beginning teachers or training teachers, and I have had the pleasure of speaking to some at MIT, is if you're in it for the money or you're in it for the holidays and you think you're working 9 till 3, ka aroha. Let me tell you right now, I don't think I've ever worked a school day from 9 till 3, even when it's non-contact or holidays. And I say that very loosely because there aren't very many teachers I know that have holidays. Well, not the hard-working ones anyway, or the working ones. So yeah, I'll be honest. If I had have known when I was when I was still signing up to training college, I probably would have thought, nah. I think I was a little bit ripped off. I was one of those. I thought it was 9 till 3 and got holidays every 10 to 12 weeks. Yeah. So wrong. So with that, so just sort of really being real with it, just saying, hey, it's not. So if you do think that, then it's not. And I don't want you to come into a profession, and it is a profession, where you think that, it's a 9 till 3. I'm done in five hours, and that's all good, and kaitaia pai. Because if you're being the best practitioner, if you're being and giving everything that you possibly can to our kids, then you won't be able to do that in the 5 hours from 9 till 3. Yeah. So with that also, with that reality check, then also comes, to answer your question, it's all about relationships. It really is. It's about building relationships. So with that, for a young, fresh 21-year-old that's just coming out, that may not know how to build those relationships, it starts off with getting to know your kids. And when I say relationships span over different elements, different parts of your learning journey. So it's that relationship that you build with your staff and your colleagues that you're working with, having the ability to ask questions if you're not sure, having the common sense to go out there and look for answers. So be a solution seeker rather than just feed me with all the answers, because you know what? We want to turn out our babies that are thinkers as well, are 21st century thinkers and learners. But if we're not modeling that ourselves, if we're not getting out there and trying to find out rather than just give me the answer, then what kind of model are we? So being able to be a little bit vulnerable to ask if you need help. Don't wait till the SHIT is hitting the fan, and that might look like you are missing deadlines and the anxiety in your health and well-being. And we know that there's a real big shift to keep an eye on our own health and well-being. And I admit I'm the worst for it. My body will be broken before, including today running around, or the other day running around with the kids, and the body and the mind was willing to run. It just, the body said no thank you, and resulted in a strained calf muscle. So with that, but it's that vulnerability to ask if you need help, but at the same time, be a solution seeker and try and have a look. So those connections, those relationships with your colleagues, relationships with your principals or your senior leadership, depending on your structure, your assistant principal, deputy principal, and also your principal. But then also your number one, our role and responsibility is to our kids and our whānau. So in your classroom, it's with your child. It's getting to know that child, because not every child is in that cookie cutter that we want them to be, as far as making sure that they do everything that they're supposed to do. We have no idea what's happening to that child and what's happening in their world. Might be a child that's come to school and just had got the heck of had a disagreement with mum or dad, or with an older brother or younger sister. We don't know what is happening in that world, and I don't want to paint the worst pictures, but that's the reality for some of our kids that are coming in. And so with that, I think some might come in with a bit of an attitude, but it's about not just sort of in the immediate just barking at that child. It is about, okay, just let's take a time and find out or maybe it's giving that child time, so as much as you want them to be reading and writing in the first moment that they get there, they've got to process it. Reality is that we're also needing to not only just teach literacy and numeracy and all the other different curriculum areas, so our arts, our science, our STEM, but we also are teaching what we call the key competencies. And it's trying to match that with what is our expectation of our whānau, of our hapori as well, our community. So what are our whānau wanting? Here we are trying to, from a ministry, perspective and hope is turn out this well-rounded academic child, but is that what our whānau wants? Is that what our community wants? We need to be asking that, because what does our learner profile look like? Not just our graduate profile. So for us at primary, and we go up to 6 year, that learner turnout, because actually they're continuing to learn. They don't graduate from learning even when they get to high school or onto university. And even just speaking that language over our children, the reality of education and valuing education. If I just bring a personal touch to that, being a country bumpkin raised in the very far north, geographically speaking of going to university wasn't something that we did, because Tāmaki Makaurau, Auckland, the closest university to us, was a 6-hour drive for us. So, it was never ever spoken to us, as far as the goal was 5th form, get school C, and preferably don't be hapu with it. So, yeah, if you made it to 6th form, or what we know as year 12 now, or even year 13, 7th form, oh man, winning, that was it. And so now, some of the complexity for some of our high school students, also that is a reality for them of making it to year 11, making it to year 12. When I think about the time that I was in high school at a school just down the road here, a school that we also feed into, the reality of our year 10 boys, and I think about our Māori boys, that's where they were dropping off, disengaged from school. Here we were in primary and intermediate trying to bring out these wonderful, well-rounded thinkers, trying to create these inquiry learners, meaning that they're being inquisitive, ask the questions, what do you want to know? Then they're getting to high school and saying, no, don't want you to really ask any questions. Here's the curriculum. We're going to teach this, and so don't necessarily need you to ask any questions. I'd just like you to answer these ones. So what are we doing for our kids? Other than create. So we've invested these 8 years of trying to create these 21st century learners like I speak of. And then for the next 5 years in high school, we're like, no. Would like you to regurgitate the curriculum so that you can get your credits in NCA level 1, 2, and 3, when the reality is for our year 10 boys, our Māori boys, they're dropping off. Our Pacifica boys, they're dropping off, because they're totally disengaged. Yeah, I'm supposed to be a learner, but you're not letting me learn in the way that I need to learn. And so sometimes that way might be me doing carving rather than, and getting literacy and numeracy credits through carving than the traditional English and maths. And so, yeah.
The reason why I'm looking at you like this is because it's like you looked into the window and you saw the little me who was struggling in high school. I could never get the concept of credits. Like, I went into primary and the teachers there were beautiful because they were willing to go sit down and go, hey, you made a mistake. Okay, cool. Let's work this out and we can get through this. And then I went to intermediate, and intermediate was a struggle because the intermediate system that was at my time were, okay, we need to get you to focus on credits. We need to get you into literacy, numeracy. And then when I went to high school, okay, let's just focus on literacy and numeracy. I can't stress this enough that the the level of stress gets so high because you then now have this expectation at such a young age, at a teenage age, where instead of just thinking about, oh, okay, I got homework the next day. Okay, cool. I can live with that. It's, I got the next 3 years as a senior to get past so I can go into a university. Because you're going back home and you're asking to your mother and your father, oh, have you ever been to university? No. All your brothers and sisters. And that's that tough reality. I mean, when you mention something like that, it hits home because it's like I slugged my way all the way from high school for someone to go, no, you don't have the university entrance for it. So thank you.
Well, the interesting part of that also is that we've got year 8s, intermediates, Form 2, for those of us that are over 21. Form 2, you're having to make a decision as you go into year 9 or Form 3 of the subjects that you want to take. I mean, thankfully, year 9 and 10, you kind of get a taster of them all. But then come to year 11, you need to be able to choose the subjects that are going to supposedly define the career that you're going to go into for the rest of your life. To be fair, as a 15 or 16-year-old, you're just worried about your mates and what's up and what's happening after school, before school, and possibly what's happening on the weekend, even though it's Monday. And that's part of it. And you've got some others that are very goal-orientated and know where they want to go, and that's been spoken over them, and they know themselves. But then also the majority of 15 and 16-year-olds don't know where they want to go or what do they want to do. And what's been modelled in their world might be that mum's a doctor, dad's a doctor, mum's a nurse, dad's a truck driver, dad's working in the local area. And so at that stage, as a 15 and 16-year-old, that pressure to be able to, or that pressure placed on them on what subjects to take is huge. When we think there are 20, 30, 40, 50-year-olds that don't know what they're doing with the rest of their life, but yet we're asking 15 and 16-year-olds to choose your subjects, and when you really probably don't know what you want to do. So you might go put yourself into something that you think, I think that will get me somewhere. I'm really not too sure. So maybe a really general subject, and you hate it. You hate it. So what happens? You go to that subject, if you even attend, because you haven't wagged, but you thought you better go, and then you disengage. So when we look at the statistics around how many of our kids are coming out with level 1 and 2, and the expectation by college is that every child leaving high school should come out with a minimum of level 2 credits. We got a bit of work to do.
No, absolutely. And I believe that, even our current generation at the moment, who's, I'm looking at a young gentleman over here who's going through his journey, and I'm just thinking to myself, I was in your shoes, young man, and whatever you decide, and I'm looking at all the young gentlemen and young ladies out there. Whatever you decide right now, make it a good one for you. It doesn't matter what it does. Like, you can ask the best teacher, you can ask the best parent, but at the end of the day, that decision comes back down to the core. You learn and soak up as much as you can. And we need beautiful people like yourself who's there to feed the plant, to feed the core for it. And we need to know how to do that. So I always think about, I used to teach adults how to do job seekers. When I did the job seeker stuff, I wasn't Vincent Vitellino, the teacher. I was Vincent Vitellino, the person who has been in job seeker. So how can I counteract with everyone? How can I interact with everyone who needs that sort of service? Well, you were a job seeker before, Vince. Let's see what with your experience. And I believe that teachers need to be more open. That's from my experience from high school to now, is be open with your students. Be as vulnerable as you can, because then they see the human side of things. And do you agree with that sort of? weeks.
Yeah. I think also culturally we've been, and I can only just speak from a Māori perspective, when I think of my dad and my uncles and also my grandparents, come from a generation that are tough, that are hard. And so being vulnerable isn't necessarily a word that we're comfortable with or used to because, through society we think vulnerability is equal to weakness, and that's not who we are, And I think more discussions need to happen around that with regards to vulnerability and what that looks like. It's not weakness, but again, it's still, it's that discourse, it's that conversations. We can look at that. I do believe there's an absolute link to showing that vulnerability and strength, and also suicide. When I think about our men out there that are battling that, just sort of, they're really caught in the crutch of if I tell somebody that this is how I'm feeling, or even to talk about my feelings, I'm weak. I don't want to be thought of as being weak. And so look at the statistics of our Māori men, from 15 to 24, particularly Māori men. What's that looking like? But suicide does not discriminate. Although that's a large number of statistics in our 15 to 24-year-old male Māori, we know now that actually suicide is affecting all generations. It's not just that age group, and it's not just our men as well. It's heartbreaking to know that we've got 60, 70-year-olds that are considering taking their lives for a variety of reasons, so that's another area as well. So I really do encourage that conversation around, what is strength? Yeah, what does that look like? We kind of have to change a little bit of what that historically has looked like for our people, for our people, our men, our women. I sort of think, when I think about World War I and World War II, and a lot of our men went off to fight in a war that was not necessary, wasn't ours. Anyway, that's another kaupapa in itself, when we think about that and the change of roles that had to happen for our women to literally keep the fire burning at home, we feel the impact of that now, where our men possibly don't know what that role looks like because they were the breadwinners, they were the leaders, they were doing that. And in that, the impact of them going off to war and coming back, and mum, nana were picking up where they were, and they just had to do that. Because they had to look after the farms, or they had to look after the household, and they had to put bread on the table because our men weren't getting paid for going over to fight. So, what's the impact of that in our generation now? We look at the loss of language, we look at the loss of culture, we look at the loss of identity in itself, and probably one of the heartbreaking parts for me here in Tāmaki Makaurau is the amount of Māori children that don't know who they are, don't know where they come from. When we think of our Samoan whānau, our Tongan whānau, they know they're Samoan, they know they're Tongan, they know they come from this village, and they have a connection, but not necessarily for our Māori whānau that have lived over in GI or lived in Te Pokea Ōtara and have lived there all their life, and so have their parents. So to them, this is their tūranga waiwai. This is their home. This is their place of standing. And that not vulnerability, but the insecurity, the anxiety that comes of it, of I'm not Māori enough because I can't speak te reo Māori. I'm not Māori enough because I know nothing about Māori. In fact, I don't even know where I come from. Many times I can ask a child, so no he koe, where do you come from? I come from GI Whaebrun, or I come from Ōtara Whaebrun. Oh yeah, okay. But where do you come from? Because, my knowledge, my understanding is, well, actually not from Ōtara, that's where you live. But you tell a 8-year-old, no, that's not where you come from. It's like, well, what do you mean? That's where I come from. That's where I live. I live on Firth and I live on Stirling, and that's where I come from. That's where our whānau's from. And so, the insecurities that raise, within that child, within their parents when you send home. Can you do your child's pepeha? Like to know what their pepeha is, because obviously we're wanting to weave in te reo Māori in there, and mum and dad don't know. And so then the anxiety for the parents as well, is there. And so the disengagement, has begun at home. And, so any getting our whānau involved is always a tough one, when we talk about building those relationships. Is bringing our community into schools, into organisations. I think as a parent, I remember taking my son off to school as a 5-year-old, and it was me, his nanny, his papa, and at that time I wasn't in education, but I remember off to school we went, and then my mum and dad saying, no, it's okay, you go to work, we'll take it. And I was like, no, I'll go, And so the three of us, off we go. And then I said, okay, well, we'll let him learn, we'll go home at lunchtime. No, Nanny and Papa want to stay there the whole day, make sure that their mokopuna is okay, and, and things like that. And kind of feel like that's lost a little through the last sort of 20 or 30 years. We don't see that happening just because the reality of busy parents so it's a bit tricky around that. So I probably want to plead with our whānau at the same time. You have an absolute richness to bring, aha ko he iti he paunamu, even though it is small, it is still a treasure, whatever that treasure may be. You might be, you don't have to be out the front talking, it could be, I'm great at making fry bread. I'm great at making otai. I'm great at, talking to people. We all have our giftings, and bringing it and sharing it with the school. And not only just sharing with the school, getting onto boards. We need to have more of our people having a say. And in order for that to happen, they need to be sitting at the table. We can't have other people that are so disconnected from our community, our reality, making decisions for our kids, and not just in schools, across all boards. There needs to be representation of our people on boards. Too long we've been just okay, te paia, let paiana, let somebody else do it. But get in there, get involved.
I was just thinking, because if you're not part of the group that's working towards it, then you're sort of just window shopping, or you're just watching from a far distance. Going, I hope something will be done. I've been in that. I'm still in that crowd where I'm like, I hope something is, but I'm changing the mindset of if I get involved with this, then something will change. Something will eventually happen, because I'm helping along to make those cogs change. You know?
You're the change that everybody's looking for.
Yeah.
Or you're the change that needs to happen. And so rather than waiting and bystanding and saying, oh yeah, okay, somebody else will come along and do it, and that, you got to jump in there and have a go. What is the worst thing that's going to happen? If we sit on the sideline, we accept it. If we aren't a part of it or being a part of it, I just sort of think, well, don't complain. If you're not going to get involved, don't complain. We need to be involved more.
Absolutely. And this is the main reason why we have this media platform, is because whoever watches this can get empowered by it and go, oh yeah, look, we got two beautiful people who are talking about this. Let's convert what they were talking about and let's make it into action. I'm going to try and see if I can be on the next local board, or I'm going to, or try and be in the next, who's doing this in this community. Okay, they got a board. Cool. Let's put my name down onto it. And that's the hope for it. And not only just creating stories, but in hopes that someone watches it and goes, I'm ready to do this.
Nice.
Yeah. once again, it's coming towards the end, and thank you so much for this beautiful interview. And I do have 2 more questions.
Ka pai.
So the first question will be is, what sort of quote or saying that you want to leave our beautiful viewers out there? You know, I always like to leave our beautiful viewers with something that our beautiful guest has locked into their minds, and it's something that always carried them throughout their years to, you know, keep them moving.
Yeah, sure. Probably one of the biggest ones comes from the very far north. Of course, it's in Te Reo Māori, and my own personal connection that this is one of our tupuna, one of our ancestors from Te Aupōuri. And it's actually quite a common one. It's been dissected, if I can say that, this particular whakatauaki. And I call it a whakatauaki. A whakatauaki is a proverb where you know who the author is. A whakatauki is a proverb, a saying that you don't know who the author is. So for myself, this whakatauaki was by Mere Ngā Roto, a puhi from Te Aupōuri, a princess from Te Aupōuri, and it's from back in the 1800s. And it starts off with this: Hu te te rito o te harakeke, kai whea rā koe e te kōmako e ko. Whakatairangitia, rere ki uta, rere ki tai. He hata mea nui o tēnei ao, māku e ki atu, he tangata, he tangata, he tangata. If I was to pluck the heart of the harakeke or te kōrare, where would the bellbird sing? And with that, it talks about literally the bird flying out to the sea and then coming back. So the thought or the personification is that it literally is, you know, he hate mea nui o tēnei ao, what is the greatest thing of this world? He tangata, he tangata, he tangata. It is people, it is people, it is people. Now, the history of that is different to how it's used today. So there's 2 parts of it. One is that I'm a firm believer of that, in the sense of if we literally pluck the heart of the harakeke, and the harakeke, if we know the flax bush, the harakeke represents our whānau. So if we pull that out, if we think colonisation, if we think about displacement of our whānau, and that where will they go? Literally like the bellbird, they will fly out to sea, they will come back to the foreshores, and that, but in a way be a little bit lost. So what is the greatest thing? It is people, it is people, it is people. Now, my understanding of that kōrero from our kaumātua of that time was that it was actually about a connection of one of our te raroa whanaunga, a union between himself and that particular puhi, that princess. And there's a lot of history that is behind there. And just for time's sake, I'll just say that there's a lot more to go in there. And I suppose, if anything, it's just reminding people that, yes, our people are at the heart of everything. And if I go back to what I've been saying throughout today's interview, it's about those relationships that we build. So for me, as the Deputy Principal of Waimanali Road School, it's building the relationship not only with my children, not only with their whānau, but our community, with yourselves here today, with our listeners, but that continues to be a journey. And for our people that are listening today, it is about our people, our people. You know, so how are your people in your world? How are you connecting with them? How are you looking after them? You know, is our people our greatest resource at the heart of everything that you're doing or making a decision to do? So, yeah.
I have one more question. And this question is going out to a viewer who had left a comment, and you're a beautiful teacher, so this is an awesome opportunity. How do you pronounce Ōtara?
How do I pronounce Ōtara?
Yes.
Well, Ōtara, Te Puke o Ōtara, as we know, is the correct name for Ōtara. But I've always pronounced it Ōtara. Yes,
so
yes.
am I pronouncing it right?
You tell me, Ōtara.
Ōtara. Hey.
There we go.
Hey.
So remembering that Ōtara has on the O, there is a macron or tohu tō. So here's a quick lesson. If you see a macron over the top, and a macron is just a little line above a letter. So in Te Reo Māori, the job of that line, that macron, is to elongate that sound. So for Ōtara, yeah, it's a little bit more pronounced in my explanation, but yeah, Ōtara. Yeah. And I think that the Delhi side of me, the Yugoslav side of me also loves rolling R's. So wherever I see an R, I've got to roll my R. I'm sure I'm probably Spanish as well. So yeah, Ōtara or Te Pokeo Ōtara. Or
It's over 20 episodes. Someone asked me on the comments, it's like, oh, okay, I will pronounce it correctly. So, Ōtara.
Ōtara, tēnā koe tutungange.
Hey. Again, thank you so much for this beautiful interview. And thank you. What a 20th episode. It's so awesome to have you here. And once again, thank you so much.
Kia ora.
And once again, to you beautiful viewers out there, and watch very closely, my friends. Thank you for watching our beautiful podcast at We Are Ōtara Podcast.
I was like, are we going to re-record that last part?
All right. One more time. We Ōtara.
Yeah, Ōtara. Yeah, maybe that'll be the bloopers.
Yeah. All right, Ōtara.
And it's a habit. It's developing that, the change, because historically, even a lot of Māori here that live in Ōtara will pronounce it the other way, the way that they're used to hearing. And that's not just Ōtara. There is so many names, and I think, big mihi to Māori TV, and also our news presenters that are out there, that are our non-Māori news presenters that are out there with the weather, trying, or even not just the weather, but also on the news, that are really trying their very best to get that
our beautiful
names, our
champions
Māori names correct. So, yeah.
All right. Once again, thank you so much. Pretend that we haven't done this before, but thank you so much.
Tēnā koe tungange.
And then once again, thank you so much for watching our beautiful podcast. We Are Ōtara Podcast. Yeah!